Long before the skyscrapers pierced the sky, long before satellites mapped the stars, humanity dared to build the impossible, not with machines, but with sweat, stone, and soul. These were not just buildings, they were dreams made solid, born from love, grief, pride, hope, and above all the desire to be remembered. Welcome to a journey through time, a deep, emotional, and immersive retelling of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, where every stone has a voice, and every ruin whispers a forgotten truth. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe if you believe history can be as thrilling as myth. Like this video to help others discover these lost wonders. Comment below, which wonder do you think we should rebuild today and why? And if this story moves you, share it, because sometimes the past holds the answers we still seek. Let us begin, not with what was lost, but with what was never forgotten. The 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the 8th still being written. In the golden sands of the Giza plateau, where the sun meets the stone with relentless fire, there rose a vision older than any empire, and more enduring than any king. The year was around 2580 BCE. In the time of Pharaoh Khufu, a name which would become immortal, not for conquest or cruelty, but for the mountain he dared to command into existence. Khufu, also known to the Greeks as Cheops, was not merely a ruler of Egypt. He saw himself as the embodiment of divine will, a living god whose soul was aligned with the sun. But he feared one thing: oblivion, the fate of the forgotten. Beneath the polished rituals of the palace, Khufu wrestled with mortality. Despite his immense power, he knew his flesh would fail, his breath would cease. The Nile would flow on, but what of Khufu? Would he vanish like grains of sand in the wind? Thus began a dream to outlast death, the divine directive, a tomb like no other. Ancient Egyptians believed that a pharaoh's soul, the Sa, would need a place to rise to the heavens and return to earth, forever cycling between this world and the divine. Ordinary tombs were not enough for a god-king. Khufu summoned his high priests and architects to his court. There was no blueprint, no precedent. He sought a monument as vast as the sky, one that would align with the stars and the forces of the universe. From this vision emerged Hemiunu, Khufu's half-nephew and royal vizier, a man of great intellect and obsession. Hemiunu was not just a priest and scribe. He was a mathematician, astronomer, and engineer rolled into one. Khufu gave Hemiunu a single command: "I shall rise from the earth as Ra rises from the east. Build me a ladder to the stars." Choosing the location was a spiritual and logistical act. The Giza plateau, across the Nile from Khufu's capital Memphis, was a vast rock shelf, solid, elevated, and unshakable. But it was more than that. To the ancient Egyptians, Giza was where the sky met the underworld. The stars of Orion's belt were believed to represent Osiris, god of resurrection. And so, aligning the pyramid with the stars was not decoration, it was cosmic navigation. The structure would be oriented almost perfectly to true north, a feat modern architects still struggle to replicate without advanced equipment. The base would be nearly a perfect square, with less than 2 inches of variation. The design of immortality. What would it look like, this celestial ladder? Hemiunu's vision was simple but immense, a 4-sided pyramid with smooth, gleaming white limestone casing stones that would reflect the sun's light, so brilliant it could be seen from miles away, like a beacon to the heavens. The height would rise to nearly 146 meters, the tallest man-made structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. But the pyramid was more than a mountain of stone. Inside it would lie hidden passageways, false shafts, chambers of the king and queen, and a grand gallery that rose high within the structure like a secret cathedral. Every block, every angle would serve both a spiritual and structural purpose. The Great Pyramid was not merely a tomb. It was a machine for eternity, But how would this monumental task be accomplished? With what hands? With what heart? For centuries, myths claimed slaves built the pyramid under whips and chains. But that image has slowly eroded like the sands themselves. Archaeological discoveries have revealed that the workers were not enslaved masses, but skilled laborers, artisans, farmers, and builders, organized into rotating crews. They were fed, clothed, and housed in carefully planned barracks. Their bones show signs of hard labor, yes, but also of medical care and nutrition. Many took pride in their work, carving graffiti into the blocks. The drunkards of Menkaure, or the Friends of Khufu. The pyramid was a national project involving tens of thousands of people. The workers were not building for coin or command alone. They were building for the gods. They were building for the idea that their nation and their pharaoh would live forever. To this day, how the Great Pyramid was built remains one of humanity's greatest puzzles. There were no pulleys, no cranes, no iron tools. And yet, each of the 2.3 million blocks, weighing between 2 to 80 tons, was shaped and placed with exquisite precision. Some theories suggest vast ramps, straight, spiral, or zigzagging. Others speak of internal systems, counterweights, and rolling sleds lubricated with water. There are even theories that claim lost knowledge geoplanar stone casting or sound resonance lifting. But one truth is beyond dispute. They succeeded. The first blocks were laid under a blazing sun. The bedrock was leveled with copper chisels and pounding stones. Hundreds of men dragged limestone slabs from nearby quarries using sledges and rope, while granite from Aswan 800 kilometers to the south was floated on boats along the Nile. Block by block, the pyramid began to rise. The beating of drums echoed across the sands. Priests chanted prayers of alignment. The stars were watched obsessively, and tools were recalibrated under the guidance of astronomer priests. And deep within the limestone heart of the earth, Khufu's immortality began to take form. Why is it a wonder? Before even its completion, the Great Pyramid was already more than architecture. It was an act of will against time. It combined astronomical precision beyond what was thought possible. Engineering so exact, it defies easy explanation. A spiritual function intertwined with myth, death, and eternity. An artistic purity in its proportion, the golden ratio and pi embedded in stone. It did not merely house a king, it became the king. A stone embodiment of Pharaoh's eternal soul, and a monument to the human mind and its audacity to reach beyond mortality. And yet, this is only the beginning. They came from across Egypt stonemasons from Aswan, farmers from the Nile Delta, engineers from Memphis, and astronomers from Heliopolis, all converging on the Giza plateau, drawn by a project that even the gods whispered of in the night winds. This was not just the building of a tomb. It was the raising of a celestial mountain, one that defied the laws of man, gravity, and time. The pyramid would not yield easily. It would have to be wrestled from the earth. And in doing so, it would take pieces of thousands of lives, offering them in exchange for immortality. The Great Pyramid consists of approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. The average block weighs 2.5 tons, though some inside the king's chamber sourced from granite in Aswan, hundreds of kilometers away, weigh over 80 tons. To build it in Khufu's 23-year reign, a stone would have had to be placed every 2 minutes, day and night. How could such a feat be achieved without cranes, wheels, or steel? The answer lay not in brute force, but organization, innovation, and a near-religious level of precision. The master of machines. Hamunu's genius. Hemunu, the royal architect, did not rely on strength alone. He devised systems and tools that turned chaos into choreography. Copper tools sharpened daily, used to cut softer limestone. Dolomite pounders to crack granite. Ropes woven from papyrus and leather, strong enough to drag stone. Ramps the great mystery, possibly straight, zigzagging, or spiraling around the structure, made of mud brick and limestone chippings. Some scholars believe Hemiunu pioneered internal spiral ramps, hidden within the body of the pyramid itself. This would explain how upper blocks were placed with such extreme accuracy without the ramps ever being found. But even with these systems, manpower was key. There were two kinds of workers: permanent specialists, masons, architects, stone carvers, and overseers and rotational labor crews, usually farmers who came during the flood season when their fields were underwater. Estimates suggest 20,000 to 30,000 workers were involved at any given time. They lived in nearby barracks. Excavations have revealed bread ovens large enough to feed armies, graves with broken bones healed, evidence of medical care, ointment jars, pottery, and beer vats. The workers were well fed and valued. Their teams had names like the Vigorous Gang or the Followers of the White Crown. Some carved graffiti into the unfinished blocks, boasting of their work as if signing a masterpiece. And it was their masterpiece. Every year, the Nile flooded its banks and spilled into the land, bringing fertile silt but halting farming. It was during this season that the most workers arrived. Boats brought granite from Aswan, limestone from Tura, and basalt for the flooring. Each barge was an engineering challenge, carrying stones weighing tens of tons. Along the riverbanks, canals were dug to guide the stones closer to the plateau. Teams with sledges dragged the blocks across wooden tracks. Recent wall paintings show water being poured before the sled, a simple act to reduce friction by half. This was not mere labor, it was a ballet of civilization. The desert was not passive. It fought back. Sandstorms erased markings. Blistering sun dehydrated workers within hours. Snakes and scorpions hid between stones. Floodwaters delayed shipments, sometimes for weeks. Injuries were constant: crushed limbs, heat stroke, infections, and yet the work never ceased. There was no stopping a pharaoh's will. When cracks formed in lower layers, they were filled and smoothed. When blocks were off by even a hand's width, they were recut. Alignment was sacred. If the stars did not match, the soul could be lost. The pyramid was oriented to true north with an error of less than 1/20th of a degree. Even today, no modern building matches that alignment without GPS. Inside the mountain of stone, a cathedral was rising. The Grand Gallery, 8.6 meters high and 46 meters long, was unlike anything ever built before. It rose through the heart of the pyramid, its corbelled ceiling a masterpiece of balance and gravity defiance. Above it, hidden chambers redistributed the weight-relieving pressure from crushing the king's chamber. These rooms were unknown until modern times and are still not fully explored. The king's chamber itself, lined with red granite from Aswan, was a place of silence and starlight. A granite sarcophagus, too large to be brought in after construction, was installed before the chamber was completed. They were thinking not in years, but centuries. Once the core was complete, workers began to cover the pyramid in Tura limestone casing stones, whiter than milk, polished to a mirror-like finish. Imagine it, a gleaming mountain under the Egyptian sun, reflecting light across the Nile Valley. The ancient texts called it the Shining Pyramid. Travelers said it shone like a shard of the sun. The tip of Pyramidion was possibly plated in gold or electrum, catching the first light of dawn and the last glint of sunset. It was no longer a tomb. It was a sundial, a star map, and a ladder to the afterlife. As the pyramid neared completion, rumors stirred. The priesthood worried. Had Khufu overreached? Had he dared to match the gods in permanence? Some laborers began reporting strange dreams, visions of judgment, of sand bleeding red, of the pharaoh's soul lost among the stars. Hemiunu, ever logical, dismissed them. "We do not mock the gods," he said. "We fulfill their purpose." But he too feared one thing. If a single block failed, if the chamber collapsed, it would all be for nothing. So he reinforced. He added secret shafts. He built backups to the backups. He knew they were not just building a structure. They were building belief. What made it a wonder? The Great Pyramid is not just the last surviving wonder. It is the foundation upon which the concept of a wonder stands. It surpassed anything the world had ever seen in scale, precision, and endurance. It united science, spirituality, labor, and art in one impossible object. It became a symbol of mankind's eternal yearning to leave something that says, "I was here." It was born not just from Khufu's ego, but from our collective hunger to defy oblivion. And so, brick by brick, a civilization poured its soul into the desert. And something eternal answered back. The year was likely near 2560 BCE. 20 years had passed since Khufu's first decree echoed across the Nile Valley like thunder through the desert. And now it stood. A pyramid unlike any other luminous monolith, dazzling in the noonday sun, glowing silver under the stars. It was no longer just a plan, a dream, or a myth in motion. It was finished. A god's breath crystallized into stone. The Great Pyramid of Giza had risen from the earth as a stairway to eternity. And at its pinnacle stood the golden capstone, a pyramidion catching the first rays of Ara, god of the sun, every dawn. The people gathered to behold it. Pilgrims from as far as Nubia and Byblos came to marvel. It was called Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. And on that day, the line between heaven and earth vanished. Khufu, once a man of flesh and blood, had aged. His breath grew shallow. The pharaoh, who had once shouted commands from marble balconies, now whispered only to the stars. He was placed within a grand funerary barca, symbolic ship drawn from cedar wood, built to carry him across the sky and through the underworld. These solar boats, discovered buried near the pyramid millennia later, were not metaphors. They were reality crafted for the voyage of a soul. The king's body was laid in the granite sarcophagus within the king's chamber, deep in the heart of the structure. But no one would ever see him again. There were no hieroglyphs, no murals. Unlike later tombs, the Great Pyramid's interior was almost entirely silent and bare as if language itself had surrendered before the eternal. The entrance was sealed. The final casing stone slid into place. And Khufu became more than pharaoh. He became starfire, part of the cosmos he so deeply revered. For centuries after Khufu's death, the pyramid stood in all its perfection. Polished and gleaming, its surfaces reflected the heavens, and its shadow swept across the desert like the hand of time. Each equinox, the sun aligned with its edges. Each solstice, its bulk became a sundial of kingship. From afar, it seemed impossibly smooth like a crafted mountain, untouched by time. Travelers stood in awe, writing poetry on stone tablets and carving oaths into the surrounding walls. Greek historians like Herodotus, visiting thousands of years later, still stood dumbstruck before it, referring to it as a wonder beyond reckoning. It became the symbol of Egypt, but more importantly, it became a symbol of humanity's eternal voice, a structure that said, "We were here, we reached this far, and we believed in forever." But nothing, not even a wonder, escapes the wear of time. As centuries passed, the white casing stones, some as smooth as glass, began to loosen. Earthquakes, particularly the devastating quake of 1303 CE, shook Egypt's foundations and shattered many outer stones. Over time, local rulers and caliphs saw the pyramid not as sacred, but as a quarry. Casing stones were stripped and reused to build Cairo's mosques, palaces, and forts. Granite was pried from inner walls. Thieves tunneled through, searching for treasure, only to find nothing but emptiness and dust. What remains now is the core, the rough inner skeleton of Khufu's dream. The golden capstone is long lost. The polished shell is gone. But the heart remains. Even worn and weathered, it still towers, still dares, still remembers. To this day, the pyramid holds secrets no one can fully explain. In 2017, scientists used cosmic ray wand scanning and discovered a hidden chamber 30 meters long above the Grand Gallery. No one knows what lies within. It may never be accessed. The internal shafts, leading outward from the king's and queen's chambers, align almost perfectly with key stars, Orion's belt, Sirius, and others, mirroring ancient Egyptian beliefs about the soul's journey through the heavens. Mathematical relationships between its height, base, and angles reveal deep knowledge of pi and the golden ratio, long before they were formally discovered. Some believe it was a giant sundial. Others say a resonant structure designed to channel earth energy or sound. Still others see it as a message to the future, encoded in geometry. But all agree, the Great Pyramid was not just a tomb. It was a message, one humanity is still deciphering. When the other 6 wonders of the ancient world fell toppled by war, fire, or earthquake, the Great Pyramid remained. The Hanging Gardens vanished into legend. The statue of Zeus melted in flames. The Temple of Artemis was looted and destroyed. The Mausoleum at Halicarnassus was broken into fragments. The Colossus of Rhodes crumbled into the sea. The Lighthouse of Alexandria sank beneath waves. But Khufu's pyramid stood firm, like the final verse of the forgotten song. It became the only surviving wonder, and not merely because of strength, but because of the idea it carried, that to build with purpose, aligned with stars and soul, was to outlive your own bones. Today, the pyramid is not merely a tourist site. It is a mirror. Every traveler who walks the desert sands and stands before it feels something shift. An ancient silence presses in. The stones seem to watch, and in the void, something whispers. What will you leave behind? It has become the seed of modern architecture, of astronomy, even of conspiracy and wonder-seeking. It is found on currency, in literature, in dreams. And though Khufu's name is barely remembered, his dream lives on, carved into 6 million tons of stone. Why it endures as a wonder? Because it dares to do what we all long for, to reach toward the stars, to bind heaven and earth with intention, to make a single human life echo across millennia. The Great Pyramid is not only a monument, it is a question, and it asks every soul who looks upon it, what are you building that will outlive you? Now let us continue to the next wonder that will really make you wonder. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. A garden born of love and longing. They say he built it for her. King Nebuchadnezzar II, the most powerful ruler of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, constructed a miracle not for conquest, or glory, or to flatter the gods, but for his queen. Amadis of Media, a princess from the mountainous lands to the north, had left her emerald hills and pine-covered ridges behind when she married into Babylon's golden throne. But in the flat, sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia, her heart wilted like a flower torn from its roots. She missed the cool breezes, the terraced slopes, the waterfalls tumbling over moss-covered cliffs. She missed green. And so, Nebuchadnezzar promised her something no one had ever seen. A mountain built by man, a garden suspended in air, a living dream in the middle of a desert city, a wonder. To understand the Hanging Gardens, one must first see Babylon, the beating heart of an empire. By the 6th century BCE, under Nebuchadnezzar's rule, Babylon had become the most splendid city in the known world. It had massive double walls, so wide chariots could race atop them. It had the Ishtar Gate, glazed in blue tiles and adorned with lions, bulls, and dragons in golden relief. It had ziggurats that kissed the sky temples, like the great Etemenanki, which inspired later myths of the Tower of Babel. And at its center, it had precision, power, and order, a city built to channel both river and sky, heaven and earth. Yet amidst the symmetrical stone and scorching sun, the hanging gardens would become a contradiction. A lush, blooming forest suspended in air, overflowing with water in a place where water was life's most precious gem. Did it really exist? This is the great mystery. Unlike the Great Pyramid, no definitive Babylonian text from Nebuchadnezzar's reign describes the gardens. We know he built palaces, temples, canals, and walls, but the hanging gardens? The only records come from Greek historians like Strabo, Philo of Byzantium, and Diodorus Siculus writing centuries later. They describe terraces rising like steps of a ziggurat, covered in soil and plants, archways and columns supporting massive overhangs of green, irrigation systems pulling water from the Euphrates to the highest levels, shadows of vines and fig trees dancing over sandstone walkways. Some say it was real, others say it was myth. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was both, because the gardens became a symbol of longing, of love, of paradise reclaimed. Let us imagine now not the scholar, but the builder. You are Bala II, chief engineer of Nebuchadnezzar's court. The king calls you one night, pacing on the roof of his palace as the stars shimmer over the Euphrates. Build me a garden, he says, not here on the ground, but high like the hills of Media. Let Amethyst walk among trees as if she were home again. Bala II does not speak. He simply bows. And then he begins to dream. Building a garden on top of stone in ancient Mesopotamia is an impossible task. But for Babylon, the impossible was merely inconvenient. Step 1. The terraces. Bala II envisions a structure rising in tiers, each layer wider than the next, like a stepped pyramid, but hollow inside. Each terrace must hold tons of soil, mature trees, irrigation channels, stone walkways, and above all, weight without collapse. So he designs stone vaults, arched chambers that transfer weight sideways, not downward. These barrel-vaulted spaces become the inner structure-cool, shaded rooms beneath the roots. Step 2. Waterproofing. He remembers how water destroys. One leak and the stone will rot. He calls upon ancient knowledge, bitumen, reeds, brick baked in fire. Every layer is coated in pitch and lead sheeting, then sealed with clay and stone slabs. It is the world's first waterproofed rooftop garden. Step 3. Soil and planting. To raise a tree skyward, one must simulate a forest in the clouds. Soil is brought from distant lands, carefully mixed with sand, silt, and crushed brick to allow drainage and aeration. Amethyst chooses the plants. Pines and cypresses from her homeland. Date palms, figs, and olives for nourishment. Myrrh, jasmine, and lily for their scent. Vines and ivy to spill over the ledges like waterfalls of green. And here lies the genius. How do you lift thousands of gallons of water every day from the Euphrates River to the highest terrace, 75 feet in the air, without electric pumps or modern machines? The answer may have been the Archimedean screw, a helical cylinder that pulls water upward when rotated. Though often attributed to Archimedes later in Greece, Babylonian engineers may have invented an early version. The system is simple yet brilliant. Slaves or oxen turn a wheel. The wheel spins a shaft. Water climbs in spirals up the shaft and pours into channels above. Gravity and slope guide it downward through a complex irrigation network, watering each terrace in succession. It is an artificial mountain that sustains itself, a machine of beauty and logic, wrapped in leaves and the scent of roses. Finally, after years of design, hauling, planting, and testing, the last vine is placed. A queen steps onto the uppermost terrace. Before her, the desert stretches gold to the horizon, but beneath her feet orchards bloom, lotus float, and dragonflies dart through dappled light. The wind carries the scent of her homeland. The leaves rustle like the forests of her youth. She looks to Nebuchadnezzar, and she smiles not as a queen, but as a woman who has come home. The court poets later called it the Garden of the Mountain, and the priests said the gods descended to walk in its shade. It was not just a structure. It was love made green. What made it a wonder? Even if it only existed in story, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon earned its place among the seven wonders for what it symbolized. The conquest of nature by will and design. The invention of complex irrigation, architecture, and sustainability. A union of art, engineering, and emotion. A vertical paradise in the most unlikely place on earth. It may never have stood as the Greeks described, but in every story, every mention, every vision of a garden raised against gravity, it still lives. It challenges us to ask, what beauty would you build for someone you love? And how high would you lift it? The city of Babylon awoke slowly. Mist rose off the Euphrates, clinging to ziggurats and walls like sacred smoke. Merchants opened stalls beneath the Ishtar gate. Priests swept temple steps with palm fronds. Slaves, soldiers, and scribes stirred. But one place in all the empire woke with a different rhythm. The garden. Perched beside the king's palace, it did not rise with bells or chants. It rose with dew sliding from fig leaves, with bees stirring from blossoms, with the creak of ancient axles as gears turned quietly beneath the surface. The garden was a place where nature was sculpted by numbers and machinery whispered life. This was no silent monument. This was a living creature. At the edge of the garden, shaded by trailing vines, stood a tall stone tower, half covered in ivy. Inside, men moved like the inner workings of a clock bare-chested, sweat-covered, muscular. They rotated long wooden cranks attached to a set of great vertical cylinders, massive bronze helices encased in wood and copper. These were the water-lifting screws, each a marvel of ancient engineering. Invented by Chaldean tinkerers, improved by Assyrian metallurgists, and now perfected under Babylon's rule. Turn by turn, the screws lifted water in coiling waves from the river basin far below, depositing it into cisterns built into the topmost terraces. From there, a series of sloped stone channels lined with bitumen and sealed with lead carried the water in a descending spiral through each layer of the gardens. Gravity became the silent gardener. Each terrace had its own set of sluice gates, controlled by levers made of bronze and cedar. When opened, they allowed measured irrigation, a delicate balance between overflow and drought. To the modern eye, it was plumbing. But in Babylon, it was alchemy. Each level of the Hanging Gardens was a different ecosystem, a different kingdom, a different memory. First terrace, the fragrant borderlands. This was the outer rim, the public face. Fringed with jasmine, lavender, myrrh, and wild basil, it created a scented veil that greeted every visitor. Between stone pillars and creeping vines, poets recited verse, and scribes etched hymns to Ishtar and Marduk. In small fountains, children fed koi fish. Doves nested in carved niches. Courtiers lingered here, pretending not to spy on the queen's private moments above. Second terrace, the orchard of foreign fruits. Here were planted pomegranate trees from Phoenicia, dates and olives from the Levant, citrus trees from Persian traders, figs that grew sweet and heavy beneath linen screens. Every fruit tree was anchored by rope and ring, their roots winding deep into engineered soil made of clay, silt, and crushed brick layered to prevent rot. The fruit was used for royal banquets, offerings to gods, and medicinal tinctures made by the palace healers. Third terrace, the grove of memory. This was Amethyst sanctuary. Cypress, pine, and fir trees of the Median mountains shaped a shaded grove. They were cooled by trickling canals and lined with alabaster benches carved with her native script. It was said that when she sat there, she wept for joy, believing herself transported back to the hills of her childhood. Only the king and her handmaidens were permitted here. Even guards stood back. Though it appeared peaceful, the garden was a world in motion. Horticulturists, early botanists, moved between terraces with scrolls and slates, measuring growth, soil density, and leaf texture. Irrigation masters adjusted channels daily, based on sun, wind, and the moon's pull on the river. Carpenters and masons performed constant maintenance, sealing cracks, replacing slabs, trimming dead growth. Priests of Ea, god of water and wisdom, walked the paths barefoot, offering honey and barley to the fountains. Even animals played their part. Songbirds nested in reeds and wall holes, encouraged to stay for insect control. Bees were cultivated for honey and pollination. Cats and mongooses guarded the roots from vermin, worshipped as protectors. Once a year, at the festival of the spring flood, the garden became a stage. Dancers wove through terraces to the beat of drums, symbolizing the union of heaven and earth. Water from the Euphrates was blessed by priests, then released through the entire irrigation system in a single synchronized flood, cleansing each plant and pool. Offerings of honey, milk, and fruit were thrown from the highest balcony into the river below. Queen Amadis, clad in blue and green, would stand at the top, watching the garden sparkle like emerald fire under the full moon. To the people of Babylon, the hanging gardens were no longer a curiosity. They were a portal to the divine. The beauty and innovation of the gardens changed Babylon's future. Foreign kings sent envoys and engineers to learn the secrets of the water screws and vaulted planting beds. Architects began incorporating green spaces into temple roofs, noble houses, and even ziggurats. Babylonian scholars used the garden as a living laboratory, experimenting with transplanting, hybridization, and seasonal planting. From this soil grew not just plants, but knowledge. And always, at the center of it all, was the couple who began it. Amadis, who brought the mountains into the heart of an empire. Nebuchadnezzar, who proved that love could be written not only in stone or decree, but in leaf and root, water and light. Some said he built it for her. Others whispered he built it for immortality, a structure so wondrous that even the gods would take note. Both may be true. Why the garden still breathes, whether it stood in Babylon or in Nineveh, as some claim, whether it was real or a poet's dream, one truth endures. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon were the first proof that humans could shape nature not just for survival, but for joy. They demonstrated hydraulic engineering far ahead of their time. They showed that beauty could be planned, just like walls or roads. They taught us that greenery is not luxury, it is healing, home, and memory. Long before vertical farming or eco-architecture, there was this, a garden that rose like a mountain, filled with life and love, in defiance of the desert and time. For many years after its creation, the Hanging Gardens bloomed without fail. Queen Amadis, now a mother and matron, would walk the third terrace with her grandchildren, telling them how each tree came from a different land, each leaf a memory from a world she left behind. The gardens became her diary, her refuge, and eventually her tomb. When she died, the terraces were closed for 7 days. No water flowed. No bees were allowed to stir. The flowers withered in tribute, and then the sluice gates opened again, as if she had become part of the roots themselves. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, the empire began to lose its symmetry. Succession wars broke out. The priesthood vied for control. Babylon, once the jewel of the East, began to crack under its own grandeur. And the garden? It remained. But it hung no longer in splendor, but in suspense. The first to fail was the screw system. The maintenance of the massive water-lifting devices required specialists trained from youth, engineers who understood both wood and water. But with the fall of Nebuchadnezzar's line, the training ceased. The temple mathematicians were replaced by tax collectors. The water stopped flowing as regularly. The cranks grew stiff. One by one, the screws rusted into silence. Without constant irrigation, the roots dried, the leaves yellowed, The once proud trees became carved shadows, creaking in the sun. The palace tried to fund repairs, but the treasuries were drained, and the new kings were more concerned with war than wonder. The garden had been a gift of love, but empires are not built on sentiment. By the time Cyrus the Great of Persia entered Babylon in 539 BCE, the garden was still standing, but barely. His scribes mention stone ruins filled with tangled roots and empty pools. He left them untouched, neither demolishing nor restoring the site. To him, they were the bones of another man's dream. Later still, when Alexander the Great arrived in 331 BCE, he searched for the gardens. Greek records say he was fascinated by the idea obsessed even, but whether he found them remains a mystery. Some claim he walked among the ruins, touching the cracked aqueducts, staring up at the empty terraces like a man gazing at a fallen god. Others say he never found them at all, and that what he sought had already vanished into dust and story. And here we come to the great debate that has baffled historians for centuries. Despite its inclusion among the seven wonders, no definitive Babylonian tablet describes the Hanging Gardens. No inscriptions, no carvings, no direct records of its construction. This has led some scholars to propose that the Hanging Gardens were not in Babylon at all, but rather in Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, built by King Sennacherib. There, archaeologists have found extensive aqueduct systems, descriptive inscriptions of a wonder for all peoples. Could it be that the Greeks confused Babylon and Nineveh, and that the true garden belonged to a different king altogether? Or could it be that the garden in Babylon was so mythical, so sacred, it was never recorded in stone, only passed down through oral tradition and Greek imagination? Perhaps the greatest wonders are not those we can measure, but those we can only dream of. The Hanging Gardens earned their place among the seven wonders, not just because of what they were, but because of what they represented. Defiance of climate, a lush forest built in an arid land, engineering beyond its time, elevating water against gravity, creating one of the earliest examples of hydraulic design. Vertical architecture, the first known attempt at stacked gardens, what we today call green towers or vertical farms. Philosophy and beauty fused, a space where mathematics and love, machinery and memory, sky and soil were woven into one. It was a structure too alive to last, and yet too beautiful to forget. Though it may be gone, the spirit of the Hanging Gardens lives on in every corner of the world, in hanging balconies of Mediterranean homes filled with cascading ivy, in green skyscrapers like Singapore's Supertree Grove, in the rooftop gardens of Tokyo, New York, and Dubai gardens above the city, built not from stone and clay, but steel and glass. It lives in every attempt to bring nature back into the human world, to balance steel with green, to create silence among noise. And above all, it lives in the question, what would you build for someone you love? They say that wonders are destroyed by time, but perhaps the Hanging Gardens never died. They simply moved from stone to story, from roots to memory, from Babylon's plains to the gardens of the mind. It may not have existed in the form the Greeks described, but in our dreams it still rises, a garden of terraces, a mountain of leaf and light, a miracle born from love, shaped by math and carried across centuries by whispers. Somewhere, right now, someone is building a small rooftop garden, not for fame or conquest, but for someone they miss or something they remember. And in that act, the Hanging Gardens bloom again. Now we move on to the next wonder that makes us to feel proud of humans, that is the Statue of Zeus at Olympia. The year was 435 BCE, and the sanctuary of Olympia stood in deep preparation. Nestled between the gentle hills of Elis and bordered by the Alpheus River, Olympia was not a city in the usual sense. There were no armies, no marketplaces, no taverns echoing with drunken songs. It was something rarer, a place for peace, For centuries, it had been the site of the Olympic Games, where athletes came not to win territory, but to honor the gods, particularly Zeus, the king of Olympus, the wielder of thunder, the arbiter of fate. But even as the games grew in splendor, the god's temple remained modest, simple columns, plain interiors, and no idol of the great god himself. This absence was both sacred and shameful. And so, the priests of Olympia issued a call: "Let us make a statue worthy of the sky." Into Olympia came Phidias, already the most renowned sculptor in all of Greece. He had carved Athena Parthenis in the Parthenon, a statue so tall it was said ships at sea could see its glint. A man of both divine inspiration and mathematical precision, Phidias did not arrive with chisel in hand, but with scrolls, assistants, philosophers, and most importantly, vision. To the priests, he made a bold claim: "I shall not make you a statue. I shall bring Zeus himself to earth." They laughed, then fell silent, because they knew he meant it. Before the god could arrive, his house must rise. The Temple of Zeus, already under construction, was the grandest project Olympia had ever seen. Overseen by the architect Libon of Elis, it stood as a Doric masterpiece, a forest of fluted stone columns, triangular pediments, and walls so white they gleamed like ice under the Mediterranean sun. Length, 64 meters. Height, 13 meters. Columns, 34 colossal pillars of local limestone, clad in shining stucco. The inner sanctum, the naos, was left empty, a chamber of holy anticipation. Here, Phidias would place his god, but not before shaping the world that God would rule. Phidias chose to make the statue in the rarest of techniques, chrysolephantine, a fusion of gold and ivory. Ivory for the flesh, glowing with a pale, lifelike luster. Gold for the robes, sandals, and scepter, hammered so thin it moved in candlelight. This statue would not be carved from one block, like marble. Instead, it would be constructed around a wooden frame, with ivory plates steamed and bent to create skin, and gold sheets shaped to flow like fabric. To do this, Phidias needed shipments of ivory from Ethiopia and India, gold coinage melted down into sheets, carpenters to build the cedar frame, chemists to preserve the materials in Olympia's humid climate, and perhaps most importantly, he needed divine quiet. So the workshop was set beside the temple, a sacred space off limits to all. Only his most trusted apprentices and the high priests of Olympia were allowed to enter. They say the construction took nearly 8 years. Day by day, piece by piece, Zeus took shape. First came the torso, strong and serene. Then the arms, one resting on a throne, the other extended in blessing. Then the head, a brow of calm thunder, a beard braided with eternity, eyes inlaid with lapis lazuli and obsidian that seemed to blink in shadow. In his right hand, Phidias placed a statue of Nike, goddess of victory, delicate and poised. In his left hand, a scepter topped with an eagle, carved from onyx and trimmed in gold. Zeus sat upon an ornate cedarwood throne, itself carved with images of myth and man-Amazons, sphinx, sea monsters, and the labors of Heracles. The throne legs were shaped like lion claws. The footrest depicted battles between gods and giants. All around the statue, braziers burned incense, and the walls reflected its glow. On feast days, priests would anoint the ivory with olive oil to prevent it from cracking, and perhaps to keep the god's skin supple, as though still living. The day the veil was lifted, Olympia fell silent. Pilgrims from all across the Hellenic world stood under the columns. They expected majesty. They expected size. What they did not expect was awe that crushed the breath from their chests. For Zeus was not just tall, he was transcendent. Over 12 meters high, so tall, his head nearly touched the temple roof, robed in gold that shimmered like a river of suns. Eyes that seemed to peer not at you, but through you. A traveler wrote, If Zeus were to stand up, he would unroof the temple. And perhaps that was Phidias' point, that even stone cannot contain the divine. The statue of Zeus became one of the seven wonders for more than just its materials or scale. It was a fusion of art and divinity, capturing power without cruelty, majesty without arrogance. It used engineering as philosophy, every steamed and shaped with mathematics. Gold floated like silk, but weighed like judgment. It evoked emotion not from spectacle, but from stillness. It made believers of skeptics and poets of warriors. Even the Roman general Caligula tried to steal it centuries later, but legend says the statue laughed, and lightning struck the ship that carried its tools. From the moment it was unveiled, the statue of Zeus was more than art. It became a destination. Pilgrims arrived by ship, by foot, by horse, crossing mountains and seas, not just for the Olympic Games, but to see the face of the god. They entered the temple trembling. The columns loomed like trees. The air smelled of cedar, smoke, and oiled ivory. And then there he was, eyes serene yet judging, beard flowing like river stone, robes that shimmered like sun-struck waves, a stillness so absolute, some claimed they heard Zeus breathe. Many fell to their knees. Others wept. Some whispered their sins aloud, though no priest asked them to. It was said that if your heart harbored a lie, the god's gaze would grow heavy upon you. For centuries, it was the final proof that the gods walked among men. The secret to the statue's realism was not just Phidias' talent, it was science cloaked in religion. To keep the ivory from cracking in the Mediterranean heat, priests developed a ritual oiling system. Every month, the statue was anointed with olive oil, drawn from sacred groves dedicated to Zeus. This oil collected in a shallow pool beneath the throne, a clever trick that also served to reflect the statue, creating the illusion of infinite height. The temple was ventilated using clever apertures and marble cooling systems, maintaining temperature and humidity balance. Even the lighting was intentional. The few bronze lamps placed within were positioned to flicker across Zeus's features, making his expression seem to shift from merciful to stern, from father to judge. Visitors left Olympia not merely awed, but transformed. They did not say, "I saw a statue." They said, "I saw the god." Phidias had built a masterpiece. But in Greece, glory is never immune from jealousy. Not long after completing the statue, Phidias was accused of impiety, charged with carving his own likeness into Zeus's throne. Some say it was true, that he had sculpted himself and his favorite apprentice hidden in the back leg of the throne near a lion's paw. Others say it was political slander, orchestrated by jealous rivals who feared Phidias's rising influence in Athens and Olympia alike. Regardless of the truth, the punishment was clear. He was imprisoned and later died either from illness or poison, exiled by the very city that once begged him to raise gods from stone. His workshop was sealed and preserved. Today, it is one of the few remains we have of his process tools, fragments, and sketches carved into walls. A temple of a different kind, not to Zeus, but to human mastery. Centuries passed, Rome rose, and with it came Caligula, a mad emperor of spectacle and ego. In the year 39 CE, he ordered that the statue of Zeus be dismantled and brought to Rome, not to be worshipped, but to have his own face replaced over Zeus's. His engineers arrived with pulleys, chisels, and gold engraving tools. But before they could begin, legend says, the workers heard a roaring laugh echo through the temple. The ladders snapped without cause. A storm struck their ships, drowning many before they reached the sea. Caligula was murdered shortly after. The statue remained untouched. Coincidence or warning? Either way, the message was clear. You do not mock what the world has called a god. As Christianity spread across the Roman world, the tide turned against the old gods. By the 4th century CE, Emperor Theodosius I banned pagan worship. The Olympic Games were halted. The temples were closed. Some accounts claim the statue of Zeus was moved to Constantinople, placed in the imperial palace as a trophy of art. There, it may have stood until a fire consumed it in the year 475 C, along with much of the city's eastern wing. Other tales say remained in Olympia, slowly decaying, until an earthquake shattered the temple, and with it, the last god of stone. But no records confirm exactly how or when it died. It simply ceased. Though the statue no longer stands, it became a wonder because of how it stilled the human soul. Unlike other monuments that glorified victory or empire, the statue of Zeus glorified judgment, balance, and internal peace. It was grandeur without excess, emotion without motion, power without cruelty. It took the invisible law, divinity, justice, and made it visible in human form. In doing so, it taught every visitor one lesson. A god is not a thing to fear, but a thing to become. By the 4th century CE, the temple stood mostly in silence. The festivals had ceased. The Olympic Games, once the pulse of the ancient world, had been outlawed by decree of Emperor Theodosius. Pagan temples were shuttered or repurposed. Statues were either smashed or stripped of their divinity, treated as curiosities from a barbaric past. The priests who once tended the Temple of Zeus had fled or converted. The scent of sacred oil no longer lingered in the marble halls. The braziers were cold, and yet the statue remained. For a time, it is here, at the twilight of the ancient world, that history breaks into legend. Some accounts claim the statue sat undisturbed, untouched out of fear, for even the early Christians whispered of the curse that befell those who tried to move it. Others say it was secretly dismantled, its gold and ivory sold, its wooden core burned. But a third and more enduring tale tells us this, that the statue of Zeus was transported to Constantinople, the new Rome. In Constantinople, where marble met mosaic and old gods danced on the edge of erasure, the statue of Zeus was said to be placed in the Laotian, the imperial palace's grand hall of pagan treasures. Here stood statues of Artemis and Apollo, reliefs of Heracles and Athena, and at the center, the seated Zeus of Olympia, so tall he brushed the domed ceiling. Visitors from across the Eastern Empire came not to worship, but to marvel. Even the Christian emperors, now keepers of a new faith, allowed the god to remain. For what harm can a god do when he is only stone? But Zeus, they soon learned, was never just stone. In 475 CE, flames erupted in Constantinople. The fire began in the imperial quarters, spreading through wooden corridors, draperies, and painted ceilings. Wind from the Bosphorus fanned it into a conflagration. By dawn, the Laotian was gone, and with it, the greatest relics of ancient sculpture, the statue of Zeus among them. No fragments remain, no gold recovered, no ivory shards retrieved. It was not destroyed in battle. It was not toppled by rage. It simply burned. A god reduced to smoke and silence. But the disappearance of Zeus did not erase his image. In every sculpture of a seated king, every depiction of divine calm amidst power, every Renaissance painting of a robed judge or godlike patriarch, you find shadows of Phidias's Zeus. Michelangelo, Da Vinci, and Raphael all studied surviving coins and engravings of the statue. In their notebooks, they recreated his posture, his proportions, even his serenity. The idea that divinity could be dignified, not wrathful, but wise entered Western art and politics alike. Even the massive seated statues of Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson in America's monuments draw directly from Phidias's legacy. A man seated in eternal watch, both protector and philosopher. The statue of Zeus is called a wonder, not simply for its scale or materials, but for its timeless function. It showed that power could be peaceful, that divinity could be dignified, not loud or punishing, that human hands, though mortal, could capture immortal presence. It did what temples, scriptures, and rituals often failed to do. It made people believe, not by fear, but by beauty. Though nothing of the statue itself survives, the world has not forgotten. Coins from the era depict Zeus exactly as Phidias shaped him. The ruins of the Temple of Zeus still stand in Olympia-tumbled columns, shattered capitals, and fragments of the marble floor that once bore the god's throne. Phidias's workshop, discovered by archaeologists, lies near the temple. Inside, they found molds and tools, carving knives, a cup inscribed with the words, "I belong to Phidias," as if he had left a message to the future. I was here, and so was Zeus. To stand before the statue of Zeus, the ancients said, was to remember your own smallness. And yet, paradoxically, it also made them feel larger, as if a spark of the divine had passed from his throne to their hearts. Today, we no longer build temples to gods of Olympus, but we still build meaning through story, art, justice, and wonder. And in each of those, a piece of Phidias's Zeus still lives. Let us now move on to next wonder that humanity can feel proud of the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus. In the year 353 BCE, in the heart of ancient Caria, the world dimmed with the loss of a king. Mausolus, satrap of Caria and ruler under the mighty Persian Empire, had died. He had been no ordinary king. He was a man of contradiction, Greek in language, Persian in dress, Carian in blood, and divine in his ambitions. He had conquered not with cruelty, but with strategy, diplomacy, and gold. His capital, Halicarnassus, was transformed into a glittering city of marble streets, Greek temples, Persian palaces, and bustling marketplaces that hummed with life. And now, its heart had stopped. The people mourned, but none more than Artemisia too, his wife, his queen, and his sister. Yes, in the customs of the royal Persian line, marriage between siblings was a symbol of dynastic purity. But for Artemisia, Mausolus had not been a duty, he had been her soulmate. And now, he was ash in a golden urn. In the shadow of Mausolus's passing, Artemisia vowed to do what no queen had dared before. She would make him immortal, not through legend, not through war, but through architecture. She summoned the greatest minds of the known world. Pythias, the architect famed for his work on the Temple of Artemis. Satyros, his sculptor in arms. 4 sculptors of divine reputation, Scopas, Bryaxes, Leocharis, and Timotheus. Each would carve one side of a monument that no king had ever earned, and no empire would ever rival. Artemisia gave them no budget, no limit, only one order. Build my husband a house so glorious that even the gods will turn their heads. A tomb not for death, but for forever. The site chosen was a gentle hill above the city, a place where sunlight spilled across the Aegean Sea in the morning, and the stars touched the earth at night. It was here that construction began. The base, a massive rectangular platform measuring 120 by 100 feet. The structure, layered in 3 tiers, each more ambitious than the last. First tier, the podium, a stone foundation lined with marble, etched with scenes of conquest and governance, showing Mausolus as a ruler both just and invincible. Reliefs depicted the battle of the Amazons, not merely for myth, but to show Mausolus's strength in taming the untamable. Second tier, the colonnade. 36 slender Ionic columns surrounded the core chamber where Mausolus's sarcophagus would rest. These columns weren't just for support, they were invitations for light, so the tomb would never feel like a prison of stone, but a palace for the dead. Third tier, the pyramid. On top of the columns rose a stepped pyramid, its 24 levels narrowing to the sky like a ziggurat from Babylon, reflecting both Eastern and Greek design, a symbol of Mausolus's hybrid reign. And atop this pyramid, a colossal chariot of marble, drawn by 4 horses, with Mausolus and Artemisia sculpted side by side, still ruling, still moving forward. The total height? 45 meters as tall as a modern 15-story building. It was not a tomb. It was a declaration. Each of the 4 sculptors took one side. Scopas, who had worked on the Temple of Artemis, infused the east wall with emotion faces that wept, warriors that bled, gods that watched silently. Leosharis filled the western side with drama kings in council, heroes mid-battle, wild horses bursting from their stone constraints. Bryaxis carved the northern wall with order and clarity, discipline in the ranks, harmony in governance, the civil face of Mausoleus' reign. Timotheus created the southern frieze, filled with flora, fauna, and gentle symbols of rebirth and eternity. And in the center of it all, behind the layers of stone and poetry, was Mausoleus himself, laid in an alabaster sarcophagus, ringed by golden lions, wrapped in royal silk, guarded by silence. Though the architects drew the plans, it was Artemisia who inspired them. She visited daily. She gave them direction when inspiration faltered. When marble cracked, she found finer stone. When laborers collapsed from exhaustion, she brought them water with her own hands. For 2 years, the work consumed her. And then, in the quietest hour of a quiet evening, she too was gone. They say she died of grief. Others say she took poison mixed with ashes from Mausoleus' urn, drinking her beloved into her very soul. But whatever the truth, she joined him in the tomb. And the builders, struck with awe at her devotion, completed the mausoleum not for a wage, but for love. By the time it was finished, the world had already taken notice. Travelers from Athens, Babylon, Alexandria, and Persia came not for trade, but to stand in its shadow. No temple, no palace, no crypt had ever risen so gracefully into the sky. It was called a temple of memory, a palace of the afterlife, a marble love letter carved with the hands of genius. Later, when Alexander the Great passed through Halicarnassus, he wept not for war or conquest, but because he knew no monument would ever match it. And when the ancient Greeks compiled their list of the 7 wonders, they chose 6 built by gods or kings. But the 7th? It was built by a widowed woman with a shattered heart. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus was not just massive, it was impossible. In a time when most buildings either served the living or housed the dead, this structure did both. It bore the elegance of a temple, the fortitude of a fortress, and the heartbreak of a tomb. It was Greek, but also Persian. A monument to a mortal king, yet built as if for a god. A place of stillness, yet designed to move the soul. And in this contradiction lay its genius. It was not just about death, it was a rebellion against it. Let us step inside, not just into the mausoleum, but into the minds that made it. 1. Pythias, the master planner. Pythias was the chief architect already famed for his theoretical writings, including his vision of ideal cities. For him, the mausoleum was not a tomb, it was a mathematical dream come alive. He designed the building to follow the golden ratio, using proportions that pleased the human eye at every distance. Whether you stood at the base or looked from the port, the lines would draw you inward. He chose white marble quarried from Mount Penthlicon, the same used for the Parthenon, but added subtle streaks of gray and gold to catch the shifting sun. He ensured air and light reached the heart of the monuments, so even the dead would not rest in darkness. 2. The 4 sculptors, breathing life into stone. Each sculptor had a different philosophy. Scopas believed that emotion was the soul's fingerprint. His figures contorted in grief or surged in anger, as though frozen in mid-scream. His Amazons were not just warriors, they were wounded sisters, reflecting Artemisia's pain. Leosharis viewed history as theater. His carvings exploded with energy chariots mid-turn, spears mid-flight, kings mid-speech. His western wall was a living epic. Bryaxis was an intellectual. His forms were symmetrical, precise, almost serene. He carved gods and humans together to show how the mortal and divine coexist. Timotheus sought eternity in gentleness. His carvings of lions, deer, and flowering vines snaked softly through stone, reminding viewers that even in death, nature would reclaim beauty. Together, they transformed walls into scrolls of poetry. Even if one could not read Greek or Carian, one could read the emotion in the curves of muscle, the tilt of the heads, the tears on the cheeks. 3. The crowning chariot. And above all literally stood the 4-horse chariot driven by Mausoleum and Artemisia. It was carved from a single block of marble, weighing more than 20 tons. Hoisting it to the top of a 45-meter-high pyramid was an engineering feat akin to building a modern skyscraper with no cranes or computers. They used pulleys, counterweights, and the raw labor of thousands. Ramps of clay and timber spiraled up the structure like a mountain path, and the work took years. But once placed, the sculpture gleamed in the sun. Travelers at sea could see it from miles away, 2 eternal rulers, frozen in triumph, ascending the sky. What made the mausoleum more than a tomb was that it did not decay. For nearly 17 centuries, it stood unbroken. Through the rise and fall of empires, through Alexander's conquest of Persia, through Roman domination and Christian resurgence, even through earthquakes that toppled cities nearby. Why did it survive? Because the people of Halicarnassus, no matter their religion or ruler, continued to honor it. In Roman times, it was revered. Pliny the Elder wrote of it in wonder, noting that it excels not only all other works of this kind, but even the names of the men who built it. Christian priests later converted nearby temples, but left the mausoleum untouched, perhaps sensing its solemn power. Even Islamic travelers in the early medieval period recorded it in their journals, calling it a house of marble spirits. But the end, as always, came slowly. In the 13th century, earthquakes rocked the region. The once sturdy marble cracked. The columns buckled. The roof began to cave in. By the 1400s, only the base and partial structure remained. But even in ruin, it was awe-inspiring. And then came the Knights of St. John Christian Crusaders, who built a fortress nearby. Needing stone for their castle walls, they turned to the mausoleum. They did not destroy it out of hatred, but out of practicality. After all, what better quarry than the grandest monument in the region? They tore marble blocks from the upper tiers. They melted down sculptures to recover lead and bronze clamps. They even ground stone reliefs into lime for mortar. And yet, they could not erase it all. Some of the carvings were too exquisite to break. These were embedded in their castle, the heads of gods watching over a Christian stronghold. Their legacy unintentional, but preserved. Centuries passed. The world forgot. But in 1846, a British archaeologist named Charles Newton arrived in Halicarnassus with a dream: to find what remained of the lost mausoleum. He dug beneath the earth, following fragments like a trail of breadcrumbs. And then he found the tomb chamber. He uncovered carved lions and horses, broken columns and friezes, the stone sarcophagus believed to belong to Mausolus. He transported many pieces to the British Museum, where today they still reside in the Mausoleum Room. And in doing so, he gave birth to a word that lives on. Mausoleum, a term we now use for grand tombs everywhere, was born from this very monument. It was not the height alone, nor the stone, nor the chariot on the pyramid. The mausoleum is a wonder because it transformed love into legacy. It combined 4 cultures into one: Greek, Persian, Carian, and Leshian. It inspired architecture across ages, from Napoleon's tomb to the Lincoln Memorial. And above all, because it refused to vanish. Even in ruins, its soul survived invasion, time, and theft. And in every marble tomb, every carved colonnade, every statue that dares to speak without voice, Mausolus and Artemisia live on. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus, though silent now in the soil of Bodrum, never truly ceased to speak. From the very moment its marble blocks were chiseled, it began telling a story that echoed far beyond its coastal cliffs. One not just of architecture or art, but of emotion made eternal. Because it was not simply a tomb. It was a question. Can memory be built? And time would answer, yes. For what followed in the centuries after its fall was not disappearance, but rebirth in every age that dared to remember. Most ancient wonders lent their glory only to their builders or their gods. The Hanging Gardens belonged to Babylon. The Colossus belonged to Rhodes. The lighthouse served a port. But this wonder gave something more precious to the world. A word. A new category of human longing. Mausoleum from Mausolus came to mean not just a large tomb, but a sacred place of remembrance. Today we say mausoleum, almost without thought. A place of silence in a modern cemetery. A marble crypt in a national monument. A palace of memory, set apart from the living. But every time the word is used, it is a whisper from Halicarnassus, reminding us that love, loss, and honor can be written in stone. The mausoleum did not die with its stones. It was reborn again and again in places, forms, and monuments that stretched from Asia to America. 1. The tomb of Augustus. Modeled after Mausolus's tomb, it became the prototype for imperial burial, a signal that even emperors bowed to the majesty of the mausoleum. 2. The Taj Mahal. Though Islamic in design, the idea was the same. A grieving spouse honored by a lover through architecture so divine that it blurred the boundary between palace and shrine. 3. Napoleon's tomb. Its domed grandeur and spiral descent mirrored Halicarnassus, celebrating a fallen ruler with a tomb of dominion, not death. 4. The Lincoln Memorial. Yes, its columns, platform, and noble elevation all pay quiet homage to the mausoleum. Lincoln, like Mausolus, is immortalized not by bloodline, but by ideals cast in stone. Even when its shape wasn't copied, its soul was, because Mausolus's tomb whispered something daring. That grief could become beauty, that death could be dignified, that architecture could embody emotion. And across time, artists, rulers, and even ordinary people embraced this. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial speaks in silence like Halicarnassus once did, simple, powerful, reflective. The memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin, a field of concrete blocks, echoes the mausoleum's rejection of decay through stillness. Even modern cremation gardens, lined with names and statues, carry the D and A Artemisia's dream, that the dead should not just be buried, but remembered. In modern-day Bodrum, Turkey, the site of the mausoleum remains quiet. Tourists walk the ancient foundation stones. A few weathered fragments of lions and columns lie in shallow pits. Flowers now grow where marble once soared. But those who stand there, especially those who know its story, feel something deep. They say the air is still heavy with presence. That time seems to pause. That even in ruin, the place commands reverence. And in museums around the world, especially the British Museum pieces of the mausoleum, sit behind glass, frozen mid-breath, mid-gallop, mid-sorrow. They are not forgotten. They are guardians of a deeper memory. Let us ask one final time, why was the mausoleum named among the 7 wonders of the ancient world? Was it taller than the Lighthouse of Alexandria? No. Was it holier than the Temple of Artemis? No. Was it more mysterious than the Great Pyramid? Perhaps not. But it was more human. Because unlike the other wonders built for gods, commerce, or military might, the mausoleum was built for love. It was the first wonder not to glorify life, but to dignify death. It was the first to embody mourning as something majestic. It showed that grief could be grand, and that memory was a form of immortality. In this way, it didn't just honor Mausolus. It honored all of us, our longing to be remembered, our fear of being forgotten, our hope that someone will love us enough to build something beautiful after we're gone. So what remains of the mausoleum? Not its full structure, not its polished stones or towering chariot, but something far more powerful. The idea that we are never truly gone if we are remembered with beauty. That marble can mourn. That love can build what time cannot erase. This is why the mausoleum at Halicarnassus still matters. Not because it was once one of the 7 wonders, but because it still is. In every statue that grieves, in every building that speaks, in every soul that remembers. Now let us see the next wonder, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. Before the temple, there was Ephesus, a vibrant city nestled between the Aegean Sea and Anatolia's forested hills. It was no ordinary city. It was a merchant capital where Persian silk met Greek philosophy, a pilgrimage site where oracles whispered from caves and sacred groves, a cultural cauldron where language, myth, and power collided. At the heart of this city stood not a king's palace, not a fortress, but a temple dedicated to one of the most ancient and revered goddesses of all time, Artemis. But not the gentle Artemis of later myths. No, this Artemis was older, wilder, a goddess of fertility, life, wild animals, the moon, and the unknowable. And she was not merely worshipped. She was feared. So when the people of Ephesus built her temple, they did not build with moderation. They built with awe. The first temple, built around 800 BCE, was modest, a wooden structure near a sacred spring. But as Ephesus grew, so did its ambitions. Around 560 BCE, the Lydian king Croesus, the richest man alive at the time, commissioned a new temple, one that would surpass all others. He spared no expense. Massive marble columns, quarried and transported over hills and rivers. Decorative reliefs depicting gods, beasts, and battles. A roof of cedar, imported from distant forests, walls lined with gold and silver, offerings from kings and commoners alike. The builders, Chersiphron and his son Metagenes, developed ingenious techniques using sand and inclined planes to lift 60-ton stones without breaking them. The result? A structure so grand that visitors wept when they saw it. Why was this temple unlike any other? Because it was not just large. It was alive with meaning. It stood on a marshy plain, purposefully chosen so that earthquakes would not shatter its foundations. Its 127 columns, each over 18 meters high, formed a marble forest that glowed white in the morning and burned orange at dusk. It was open air, allowing moonlight to bathe the inner altar where Artemis's statue stood. It housed treasure, oracles, refugees, and lovers, a temple, a bank, a courthouse, and a sanctuary all in one. And above all, it honored a goddess whose image defied categorization. She was carved with rows of breasts or eggs, symbols of fertility, surrounded by beasts, nymphs, and cosmic wheels, wearing a crown of walls, as if she herself were the city. She was not just worshipped. She was believed to live within the temple, as if stone itself became her body. In 356 BC, something unthinkable happened. A man named Herostratus Obscure, unknown, unwanted, walked into the Temple of Artemis with fire in his hands. No one stopped him. He was not a soldier, not a conqueror, just a man who wanted to be remembered. And with oil, rags, and flame, he burned the temple to the ground. It happened on the same night that Alexander the Great was born in a distant Macedonian palace. A philosopher later quipped that Artemis could not save her own house, for she was too busy delivering Alexander. The people were horrified, not just by the loss of stone, but by what it meant that even the most sacred places were vulnerable. Herostratus was executed, and his name was banned from being recorded. But irony had its way. His name survives today as a symbol of infamy sought through destruction. The temple was gone, but not forgotten. And then something rare happened. The people did not give up. They did not say, "We will never match what we had." Instead, they said, "Let us build something even greater." The new temple, funded by kings, merchants, and pilgrims, was twice the size. It became the largest temple in the Greek world, even grander than the Parthenon. And this time, they used not just stone and wood, but intention. They engraved the goddess's name into every cornerstone. They opened the sanctuary to women in childbirth, to runaway slaves, to those seeking sanctuary. They carved zodiac symbols into the marble, aligning the temple with the stars. And above all, they rebuilt Artemis's statue, more powerful and mysterious than before. They did not see the fire as an end. They saw it as a trial, and the new temple rose like a phoenix from its ashes. For centuries after its reconstruction, the Temple of Artemis became one of the most visited places in the ancient world. More than just a temple, it was a destination. Pilgrims came from Egypt, Babylon, and Rome. Merchants prayed before voyages, leaving behind coins and sculptures. Kings brought gifts of gold and ivory, hoping to earn Artemis's favor. It became so famous that ancient guidebooks of the Seven Wonders always listed it first, not for size, but for sacredness. And in the cool corridors of the temple, beneath the silvered eyes of Artemis, thousands found peace, hope, or answers. The temple's fall came slowly. In 262 CE, a Gothic invasion looted Ephesus and damaged the temple. Earthquakes further weakened it. Then came Christianity, and with it, a new idea, that pagan temples must fall. By the 4th century CE, it was abandoned. By the 5th, it was dismantled. Its stones were reused in churches, its columns repurposed in Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. And yet, despite its physical destruction, it never truly disappeared. Why? Because the idea it embodied never died. That the divine could be welcomed into the human world. That a city could be guarded by love, not just walls. That art, devotion, and vision could build eternity. When the Temple of Artemis was burned to the ground in 356 BCE, the world mourned. But what followed was not merely reconstruction, it was resurrection. The Ephesians, shaken but unbroken, gathered not just architects and artisans, but philosophers, astronomers, and priests. They weren't simply rebuilding a shrine. They were crafting a manifestation of the goddess herself, a structure so perfect that it would blur the line between the mortal and the divine. And this time, they sought to make it timeless. The rebuilding was led by the architect Dinocrates, later famous for planning Alexander the Great's city of Alexandria. But here in Ephesus, he had a different goal, not city planning, but divine geometry. His vision was clear. Let each column be a tree of light. Let each hall be a poem. Let the goddess be known not just through worship, but through the space she inhabits. Under Dinocrates, the temple would become a symphony of numbers and a song of proportions. It would rest on a massive platform measuring 115 by 55 meters, nearly the size of a modern football field. It would have 127 Ionic columns, each over 60 feet high, arranged in double rows. Each column would be carved, not smooth spiraling with floral patterns, deities, and lions like stories told in marble. The inner sanctum would house the rebuilt statue of Artemis, again gilded, again mysterious, with her crown of city walls and her body adorned in sacred symbols. It was no longer just a temple. It was a living scripture, built in stone. The new temple wasn't just designed to impress. It was designed to communicate through architecture itself. Hidden inside its proportions were ratios of the moon's cycle connecting Artemis, the lunar goddess, to the rhythm of time itself. Orientations that aligned with equinoxes and solstices, so that sunlight would pierce the temple at precise holy moments. A foundation of marshland, chosen intentionally, not only for earthquake resilience, but for symbolism. That life springs from the mud, just as Artemis births life from wildness. Every element had meaning. The number 7 was encoded in step counts and column groupings, echoing the 7 stars of Artemis's constellation. The number 13, sacred to the lunar calendar, was found in shrine niches and incense alcoves. The temple did not merely house divinity. It expressed it like a hymn cast in shadow and stone. What kind of goddess deserved a wonder of this scale? Artemis of Ephesus was not the huntress known to most of Greece. She was older, deeper, possibly even born from pre-Greek Anatolian fertility deities. Her statue shocked outsiders. She had rows of protrusions on her chest, interpreted variously as breasts, eggs, or bull testicles, all symbols of fecundity and cosmic creation. Her robe was layered with animals, zodiac symbols, and celestial motifs. Her hands were outstretched, not in aggression, but in blessing. Her crown was not stars, but city walls, declaring her both mother and protector of Ephesus. To her followers, she was the world womb, the great mother, and the eternal night from which light is born. And to worship her was not to bow, but to enter her presence. That's what the temple was, a body built for a goddess. To step inside the Temple of Artemis was to step out of reality. Imagine this. You ascend the steps, each one making your breath shallower. You pass between columns so tall they vanish into mist and torchlight. The scent of pine and lavender fills the air. You hear the low hum of prayer, the soft footsteps of pilgrims, the distant ring of bronze. Above you, the roof is open, and the moon stares back like an eye of Artemis herself. In the inner sanctum, the priestess speaks not in commands, but in riddles and echoes. The statue of Artemis stares through you. People claimed to feel weightless inside. Some wept. Others swore they saw visions of animals giving birth, of stars swirling, of past lives flickering like candlelight. The temple didn't just host the goddess, it was the goddess. The Temple of Artemis was not just a sacred site. It was a political engine, a financial vault, and a legal fortress. 1. Asylum and authority. Any slave, thief, or debtor who reached its steps was safe from kings, soldiers, even executioners. The temple enforced this law so strictly that entire neighborhoods were declared part of its protection zone, like a force field of mercy. 2. Banking and wealth. Kings stored their treasure there, trusting Artemis's wrath more than armies. The temple managed accounts, loans, and investments, an early sacred bank. 3. Civic power. The priestesses and temple guardians wielded influence rivaling mayors or generals. Major decisions, like alliances and wars, were debated within temple halls, beneath the goddess's gaze. It was more than holy. It was untouchable. Until time proved that even holiness has a horizon. By the 1st century CE, the world was changing. Rome now ruled Ephesus. Temples to new gods Jupiter, Mithras, and eventually Christ rose nearby. Pilgrims still came, but some came as skeptics. One visitor, the Apostle Paul, called the temple a haven of idolatry. Riots followed, the city split, and though the marble still glistened, the soul of the temple began to dim. Nature, too, began to reclaim its throne. Earthquakes rattled the foundations. Silt from the Cayster River turned the harbor into swampland. The great statue was removed, possibly destroyed. Yet even as it began to fade, the temple remained respected, feared even, because it had lasted through fire, and because the world had never again seen a place quite like it. The city that had once been Artemis's throne was changing fast. By the dawn of the 3rd century CE, Ephesus was no longer a beacon of Greek purity or Anatolian mystery. It was now a bustling Roman metropolis. Baths, forums, and theaters rose in polished marble. Latin mingled with Greek. Wealthy citizens commissioned statues not of Artemis, but of emperors and philosophers. The Roman world was stretching from Britannia to Mesopotamia, and Ephesus was at its cultural crossroads. But beneath the wealth and elegance, something deep and irreversible was stirring. a spiritual revolution that threatened the old gods. They came quietly, at first whispering in homes, preaching by rivers, gathering in candlelit catacombs. The Christians, to them, Artemis was not a goddess. She was a false idol, a beautiful deception carved in stone. Her temple, magnificent though it was, stood for all that they rejected: paganism, polytheism, power without humility. The book of Acts recounts a dramatic moment when the Apostle Paul preached in Ephesus, declaring, "Gods made by human hands are not gods at all." The city erupted. Silversmiths, whose entire livelihood depended on selling Artemis figurines to pilgrims, cried out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." They gathered in the grand theater, thousands strong, and demanded Paul's exile. It was more than religious conflict. It was a war of worldviews. 3. The slow death of a goddess. The Temple of Artemis survived riots. It survived earthquakes. It survived wars, invasions, and even its own burning. But it could not survive neglect. As Christianity rose from an underground faith to the official religion of the Roman Empire, the grand temples of the old gods began to wither. The final blows came not with sword or flame, but with policy. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius I issued the Edict of Thessalonica, banning pagan practices. Temples were closed, priesthoods disbanded, sacred statues toppled. Artemis, once the queen of Ephesus, became a memory. Her temple was no longer guarded, no longer maintained, no longer filled with incense or song. Instead, it was pillaged stone by stone. Marble blocks were taken to build homes, basilicas, even fortresses. Columns were shipped across the sea to Constantinople, where they became part of the Hagia Sophia, a church to the new god. And so, piece by piece, the wonder was unbuilt. By the 6th century CE, the once glorious temple was a swamp. The harbor that had fed Ephesus silted up, cutting the city off from the sea. Mosquitoes buzzed where pilgrims once wept. The land swallowed its past. It was as if Artemis herself had withdrawn, taking with her the mystery, the majesty, and the meaning. For over 1,000 years, the temple was forgotten, not just abandoned, erased. Then, in 1869, a British engineer named John Turtle Wood arrived in the ruins of Ephesus. He had read ancient texts, followed fragmented clues, and believed that beneath the marshy ground near the Cayster River, the lost wonder still waited. He dug. For 7 years, he searched, battling floods, disease, and doubt. Locals called him mad. And then, in 1876, he found it. A single column base, etched with ancient marks. Then more foundations, fragments, coins bearing Artemis's likeness. Though the temple was gone, its bones remained. The discovery sent ripples across Europe. Museums in London and Vienna displayed what they could recover. Scholars wept at descriptions of the fallen goddess. And slowly, the world remembered. The temple had fallen, but its story rose again. Was it the scale? The grandeur? The columns? The gold? No. It was a wonder because it was built on love, not for conquest or ego, but for something unseen. Because for centuries, people had believed so deeply in something greater than themselves that they carved their prayers into stone. Because it defied time, fire, invasion, and even oblivion. Because even when Artemis fell silent, her temple whispered on through the hearts of those who remembered. Though the Temple of Artemis no longer stands, her legacy breathes through us. You can see it in the columns of neoclassical buildings, mimicking her style. The cathedrals and mosques that took inspiration from her design. The idea that sacred space can be more than function, it can be transcendent. And above all, you can see it in the way humanity continues to build with meaning. For every sacred temple, every sanctuary, every quiet corner built for reflection, there is a little Artemis in it. A memory of a time when people believed that stone could hold spirit. The Temple of Artemis is not gone. She simply changed form. She now lives in memory, in marble fragments, in museum halls, in moonlit dreams. And perhaps that is the true nature of wonders. They may fall, they may fade, but they never truly die. Not when they are built from faith, beauty, and the eternal human yearning for the divine. Let us now journey west to the green valleys of Olympia, a place where thunder echoed not from clouds, but from crowds, where time paused every 4 years in sacred reverence, and where one colossal figure sat, enthroned like eternity, carved in ivory. The next wonder, the Colossus of Rhodes. It was the year 305 BCE. Rhodes, a proud and prosperous island in the southeastern Aegean, stood as a glowing pearl between Greece and Asia. Known for its brilliant navy, bustling harbors, and democratic ideals, Rhodes had become a trade hub, a center of learning, and a symbol of Greek resilience. But with success comes enemies. And one such enemy was Demetrius I, the son of one of Alexander the Great's generals. With an army of 40,000 men and the most advanced siege weapons the ancient world had ever seen, including a monstrous siege tower known as the Helipolis Demetrius, launched an all-out assault on Rhodes. The Rhodians were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped, but they had one thing Demetrius did not: unbreakable unity. For a year, the siege dragged on, battering the city walls, disrupting the harbor, choking trade. But Rhodes would not fall. By 304 BCE, Demetrius gave up, humiliated. He left behind his war machines, his weapons, even the Helipolis itself, abandoned like bones on the battlefield. Rhodes had won. But it wasn't enough to survive. They wanted the world to remember. The Rhodians gathered in the Agra, flames flickering on the marble colonnades, and made a choice. Let us turn the weapons of war into a monument of peace. Let us melt down the siege engines and raise a god to the sky. The god was Helios, the sun god and patron deity of Rhodes. He had always been honored on the island, but now he would be immortalized. To design the monument, they turned to a brilliant sculptor named Chares of Lindos, a student of Lysippos, the same master who sculpted Alexander the Great. Chares proposed something bold, audacious, something the world had never seen. A statue as tall as a mountain. It would take 12 years. And what rose from the earth was not just a statue, it was a statement of defiance. The Colossus stood over 33 meters tall. That made it nearly the height of the Statue of Liberty's body, and the tallest statue in the entire ancient world. Its very construction was a marvel of engineering. The inner skeleton was made of iron and stone blocks to provide balance and core strength. The outer layers were crafted from bronze plates, hammered and riveted into place repurposed from the war machines Demetrius had left behind. Enormous scaffolding wrapped around it like a second skeleton. Workers built from the inside out, stacking earth around each level, then excavating it as they progressed upward. There is no definitive image of the statue, but some ancient texts claim he stood naked in the tradition of Greek heroes. His right hand shaded his eyes, scanning the sea. His left hand held a torch or a spear. His crown gleamed with rays of bronze, mimicking the sun. One legend says he stood astride the harbor, ships passing beneath his legs like insects beneath a god. Historians doubt this. It would have been technically impossible. But the idea, the sheer majesty lives on. It wasn't just about how he stood. It was why. For the people of Rhodes, the Colossus was more than Helios. He was the soul of the city. He embodied independence, dignity, and the unyielding light of liberty. When sailors arrived from across the Mediterranean, the first thing they saw was the sun himself, towering above the city, welcoming them to a land that had chosen courage over capitulation. In his shadow, debates echoed in the assembly. Ships unloaded spices, scrolls, and silks. Philosophers gathered to watch the sunset strike his bronze skin. Children were born beneath his gaze. Lovers met in the gardens that spread around his base. Poets wept beneath his feet. The Colossus stood for only 56 years. But during that time, he became one of the most famous symbols on Earth. In 226 BCE, a massive earthquake struck Rhodes. Temples crumbled, ships capsized, statues shattered, and the Colossus mighty as he was broke at the knees. He crashed to the ground with such force that the earth trembled again, his limbs sprawling across the port like a fallen giant. His head rolled into a garden. His arm blocked a merchant road. His sun-crowned face was buried in the sand. The people wept, but they did not rebuild. The oracle at Delphi warned, "Do not raise what the gods have cast down." And so he lay there, for 800 years a broken titan in the dust, drawing travelers from across the known world. Even ruined, he inspired awe. Few men can wrap their arms around his thumb, one historian wrote. Children played on his bronze ribs. Elders told tales of his gaze that once turned darkness into dawn. And when the Arab armies conquered Rhodes in the 7th century CE, they sold what remained of the Colossus for scrap. The bronze was melted down. The legend ... was not. The Colossus of Rhodes was a wonder not because of its height, not even because of its artistry. It was a wonder because it proved something eternal, that when cities are broken, they can rise. That when giants fall, the memory of their standing can lift others. That bronze, though melted, cannot erase meaning. The Colossus stood for only half a century, but in that time, it became a symbol for all ages. The Statue of Liberty was inspired by it. Modern Rhodes still honors it in coins, flags, and stories. And every time a monument rises from the ashes of war, a new Colossus is born. The people who built him are long gone. But we, too, have known sieges political, emotional, spiritual. We've faced earthquakes in our lives, and still we build. Still we rise. Still we stand for something larger than ourselves. Let the sun god see us, the Rhodians once said. Not on our knees, but on our feet. And even now, when we dare to be bold, to stand tall, to resist the storm, we become colossi too. Now we arrive at the final marvel, the last flame of the ancient world's most legendary list. We travel to the mouth of the Nile River, where the sea meets civilization and knowledge was once lit by fire. This is not only the story of a tower, it is the story of humanity's unrelenting desire to illuminate the darkness. It is the Lighthouse of Alexandria. In the 3rd century BCE, no city on earth could rival Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great, it was the jewel of Egypt and the bridge between continents. Stretching along the Mediterranean coast like a necklace of marble and gold, Alexandria was a capital of science and philosophy, home to the great library, which housed more than 400,000 scrolls. A city of wide streets, towering columns, bustling harbors, and multicultural wonder. But its greatest marvel stood not in the city center, nor in a temple, but off the shore on a small island called Pharos. There, a tower would rise that changed not just navigation, but the very way humanity saw its place in the world. After Alexander the Great's death in 323 BCE, his empire splintered. Egypt came under the rule of Ptolemy the First Soter, a Macedonian general who would later declare himself pharaoh. Ptolemy was no ordinary warlord. He valued knowledge, culture, and most importantly power through permanence. Conquest fades, he is rumored to have said, but stone endures. So he set about turning Alexandria into a city that would rival Athens and Babylon. But there was a problem. The harbor of Alexandria was dangerous. Treacherous shoals, hidden reefs, shifting sandbanks. Ships carrying grain, scrolls, and treasure often wrecked before ever reaching the docks. Ptolemy knew that if Alexandria was to be the world's gateway, it needed a guardian. Not a soldier, not a wall, but a light. It was his son, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who commissioned the Great Tower around 280 BCE. The architect? A genius named Sostratus of Cnidus. Little is known about him, but his name would be etched in legend literally. And so, construction began on the island of Pharos. What they built was not just a lighthouse. It was the first skyscraper in history. The design was as follows: a square base, massive and strong, made of light-colored limestone blocks. An octagonal midsection, narrower but elegant, offering sweeping views of the sea. A cylindrical top, upon which rested a massive bronze mirror, and at night, a flame visible for miles. Its total height? Somewhere between 100 and 130 meters. That made it the second tallest man-made structure in the ancient world, behind only the Great Pyramid of Giza. At its peak, it was visible for over 30 miles at sea. Some records suggest polished bronze mirrors reflected sunlight by day. By night, a huge fire was kept burning its smoke, and light signaling safety to sailors far beyond the horizon. And on top of it all, a statue, possibly of Zeus or Poseidon, holding a trident or torch. To ancient sailors, the Lighthouse of Alexandria was a miracle. Imagine, you are a merchant from Carthage, sailing across the violent blue of the Mediterranean. Your hold is full of olive oil and scrolls. Storm clouds loom. Your crew is sick. The wind howls. But in the distance, a golden shimmer, then fire. And then, like an eye in the darkness, the lighthouse appears, tall as the gods, its flame burning above the sea. It meant safety. It meant civilization. It meant you were no longer alone. There's a curious tale about how the architect Sostratus signed his work. Ptolemy II had forbidden him from placing his own name on the tower. It was to be credited to the king alone. But Sostratus was clever. He carved his name in the stone, then plastered over it with an inscription honoring Ptolemy. Centuries later, the plaster wore away, and the truth was revealed. Sostratus of Cnidus, son of Dexiphones, to the gods for the benefit of sailors. Even in this, the lighthouse carried a deeper message. The monument was not for kings, not for pride, but for people. The lighthouse stood for over 1,500 years. It survived dynasties, Roman conquest, and the rise of Islam. But it could not survive the earth itself. A series of earthquakes between the 10th and 14th centuries devastated the structure. By the year 1303, it was almost entirely gone. In the 5th-10th century, the Sultan of Egypt used its remains to build a fort, the Cape Bay Citadel, which still stands on Pharos Island today. For centuries, the lighthouse was lost to time. Its ruins slumbered beneath the waves, until recently. In the 1990s, marine archaeologists diving near Alexandria's harbor discovered massive blocks, statues, and columns lying on the seafloor, likely remnants of the ancient wonder. Even in pieces, it still pulls us into its orbit. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was the first great beacon of human technology. It was a marriage of architecture, science, and purpose. A monument not to gods, but to guidance. A promise that even in the blackest seas, we can create light. It is a wonder because it fulfilled the oldest, deepest desire of civilization: to connect, to protect, to illuminate. It reminds us that even when the world is uncharted and storm-tossed, we can build something to lead each other home. Today, no one sails toward the Lighthouse of Alexandria, but its spirit has never faded. You see it in airport control towers, in coastal lighthouses across every continent, in the blinking lights of satellites orbiting Earth, even in digital maps and GPS signals, each one a modern pharos guiding us through the night. And deeper still, you see it in the people who hold torches for others, the teacher who stays late, the coder who builds open source tools, the mother who leaves a light on for her child. They are all lighthouses. They are all keepers of fire. And the world still dark in places, is a little brighter because of them. You may think the list ends at 7, but there is always an 8th wonder, not one of stone, nor bronze, nor marble. It is you. It is the human spirit that dares to imagine them, remember them, tell their stories. It is the architect sketching in candlelight, the poet staring at ruins, the dreamer climbing a staircase to nowhere, believing there's still something at the top. The true wonder was never a building. It was the mind that dreamed it, and the hands that made it real.